We get started. So I wanted to talk about the wrap up of the semester. We've got our final coming up on May 9th. I guess it's Thursday of finals week. I don't get to pick that. And it's at 7:30 in the morning, and it'll be in here. So at least we'll get it done quickly. You have one more homework to do on zoogeography, so just wait until that lecture, and then you can start that on the 29th, and it's due on the 30th. So that's just kind of refresh you on zoogeography, see if you got what you need to out of the lecture. There's an online quiz again. It'll be just like the other ones. That opens up on May 1st and closes the night before the exam on the 8th. And then as soon as probably early next week, I'll post a study guide for the final too. And next week I'll tell you more about what the final is going to look like. Okay? So today we're lucky that we actually have a guest lecturer. You don't have to listen to me. Nicole is taking the class for honors credit, and she agreed to do a lecture for her honors credit. So take it away.
All right, hi guys. My name is Nicole Albert. I am a third year honors student here at CSU. I am a double major in zoology and wildlife biology, and I have never given a lecture before, so bear with me. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me, and I will try my damnedest to answer them. So today our lecture is going to be on tropical reefs and the fishes that live inside them. We're going to go over the ecosystem of the tropical reef and the interdependencies of the different species that live in there. The threats to reefs, and what you guys can do about it. So what are tropical reefs? Well, they look like that. If you don't know what a tropical reef is, I doubt that you don't. But they are one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet, even more diverse than rainforests. They have about 30 to 40% of all marine life that lives in them in one way or another, or they're associated with it. You can observe about over 75 species in a singular coral reef dome. For reference, there's less than 75 fish species in the entire state of Colorado. And it's a product of about 350 million years of evolution among the fish and vertebrates and their relationships between each other. And they play a wide variety of functional roles. Different species will do different things. And every single one of them is integral to the success of that coral reef system. And they cannot exist without every single one of those species. And there's a really good quote here by Carl Sabina that says, "All in all, reefs represent the most spectacularly complex diversity of life in the known universe." And that's really interesting because coral reefs only make up less than 2% of the ocean's surface. Not surface, but area of the ground. You can see here all these little black dots are different locations of the coral reefs throughout the world. There's not very many of them, or I guess there's a lot of them, but they're all really small and take up not very much space. So what are the corals that make up these coral reefs? A lot of people think they're plants. They're not plants, they're animals. And there's two different types of corals that you can find in the ocean. There's hard corals and there's soft corals. Hard corals are the reef-building ones, the ones that we're most familiar with. We can call those hermatypic, and they need algal symbionts to survive. They're mainly composed of hardened calcium carbonate, which is very similar to chalk if you're not very familiar with calcium carbonate. And there's also cold and deep water forms, if you didn't know that. Soft corals they don't form reefs. Also, they're called ahermatypic, and they can grow without the algal symbiont called zooxanthellae. They can host zooxanthellae, but they don't need them necessarily to grow and survive. And they're also made of calcium carbonate, but it's not the same structure as the stony corals. It's not hardened, and it's not like stony. It's more, they're made in sclerites, which are these sharp little microscopic structures. If you want to know what those are, look them up. They're really cool. With the algal symbionts in hard corals, they actually grow inside their hosts, which are colonial cnidarians. Cnidarians are a group of animals that you find in the oceans. They're like your sea jellies. except it's your sea jelly just turned upside down and stuck to a rock. That's kind of what these guys are. And they're super teeny tiny, and they have these little guys. The green you see here is all that zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae will photosynthesize for the polyps, and it actually plays a really big role in secreting that calcium carbonate skeleton that the cnidarian can grow on. And in return, the cnidaria will provide housing and shelter, and also the products of respiration like nitrogen and phosphorus. And one big consideration that we have to think about when we think about this algal relationship is algae are photosynthesizers. They need sunlight to grow and survive. And so because of this, they need really, really clean, clear water. And they also are, extruded from the cnidaria really easily if the temperatures change at any drastic amount, or if the pH changes at any drastic amount. And the temperatures that they usually survive in are about 21 to 29 degrees Celsius. So moving on to the reef interdependencies, can you guys spot the fish in this picture? Here. Tell me go left or right. Wait. You're right. Look.
Right.
Okay, where's the other one? There's two. It's right there. I don't have the fishing pole, but it's right there. That's the head, and then that's the other one. They're really cool. They're pygmy seahorses. We'll get into those here in the next slide. And there's a bunch of different interdependencies that can happen within these coral reefs, and one of them, like an example of mutualism, is the clownfish. I'm sure most of us have seen Finding Nemo, and they go in the anemone. Well, they can actually they live in 2 different species of anemone, and nothing can touch those anemones but clownfish. They're poisonous or venomous to every other species except for clownfish. There's also another example of commensalism with the long-nosed butterfly. These guys, they're pretty smooth. They don't have very many defense mechanisms. Or they don't have any defense mechanisms, actually. So what they'll do to get away from predators is they'll kind of just burrow into the coral reef, and then they have this spine, you can't really see it in the picture very well, it's right there, that opens up so that the predator can't pull them out of the reef. It kind of works like an arrowhead, so it like goes in and then opens up so it can't come back out. Another example of mimicry here with the cleaner wrasse and the fang blenny. The cleaner wrasse is a fish that will follow other fish around and clean algae and ectoparasites off of them. And the fang blenny looks almost exactly like it, and it will act like it's a cleaner wrasse, but instead it will go and take chunks out of fish instead of cleaning them. And if that cleaner wrasse didn't exist, the fang blenny probably wouldn't be able to survive, because other fish would see, oh my god, this fish is eating off me, I should kill it. You know. And then there's Crypsis with the pygmy seahorse, where it copies the look of its environment. It's really pretty. I like them a lot. And so, as you saw in this last picture, all of these fish have different functional roles. They all have different jobs. Like this one removes algae from crevices. This one removes algae from the ground. That one removes algae from the surface. It's so specific that they even separate their jobs, not only by what they're doing, but by the area that they're doing it in. And one really good example of a fish that has a very specific job is the dusky farmer fish. And this study that was done on the dusky farmer fish was to show how important they are in their areas. They are very territorial species, and they're also grazers, so they eat algae. And they will protect their territory from other roving grazers so that they don't eat the algae that they want to eat, you know. And so what the study did is it compared the algal biodiversity inside the territory of the farmer fish and outside the territory of the farmer fish. And then they also put cages on top of the reef to make sure no fish could get in as a control. And they found that outside there was extremely low biodiversity. regardless. It goes up and down a little bit as most things fluctuate in nature. And inside the territory, it's relatively high. And you see it's going up. Eventually it'll probably go down, and then it'll go back up and back down again. But in the caged one, this is where it's really interesting, is when they put the cages on a reef system that had low biodiversity, the biodiversity did go up. But after a while, it hits this point where one or two species will take over the entire area, and that biodiversity will go down. And this highlights the importance of grazing. You can't just protect an area and not have a grazer. You have to have a grazer there that mediates everything to make sure that not one species or another will get out of control. So what structures these reef communities? What caused this? Could it be competition, predation, something else? Well, we have to consider some facts about the reef communities. Like I said, they're all specialized. They all have different jobs. They're all very species rich and population dense. There's fish everywhere. They're all running into each other all of the time. And the reef composition varies between reefs. So there's one evolutionary mechanism that causes this. It would be interesting because these species are so different between reefs. And we also have to think of the life history of reef fish. Most of them will spawn pelagically or in open water. And we see this with the Nassau grouper. So this is a Nassau grouper. He looks like that, as an adult at least. And when they reproduce, they will go out into the open water, spawn, throw a bunch of eggs, throw a bunch of sperm out there, have this big ball of fish. It's kind of gross. But it looks like that. And then the eggs will fertilize, and then they will disperse into their own coral reef systems, and become a juvenile, grow up, turn into adult. But it's not that simple all the time. Like, yes, you have to first get fertilized. There's not a 100% chance you're getting fertilized. There's not a 100% chance that you're going to survive and go into your reef system. So we have these stochastic and deterministic factors that affect the survivability of these fish. So first you have your fish that are going out, the adult fish going out reproducing, and then they have their larvae if they fertilize. And then on the process of the larva can die, or they can survive and settle into their own reef system. So they assemble a reef system. But just because you make it the reef system doesn't mean you're necessarily going to survive. You still have to survive the competition with other species, or the predation that's being put upon you, or if you're a predator predating on other things. And you'll either die, or you'll grow up and survive, where you can then go on and reproduce your own little fish babies. So that was a very good example of the lottery hypothesis, which is a hypothesis that we come up with to reason why there's so much very specific niches in these fish. And there's also all these other hypotheses, which we will go over. First one, niche differentiation, which is what I've been talking about for most of this time, is that the specialization of the fish's purpose is because of past competition forcing these fishes into narrow niches. That rhymes. Anyway, second one, lottery. Being able to survive. If you survive and you're lucky, you get to reproduce. Another one is the recruitment limitation. If you've taken ecology before and you know about K values, this centers around that theory. And it is a theory about the limit of how many fish or individuals can live in an environment. And that's based upon how much food, how much space, how many resources are available in that environment for that specific species. And if there's not enough, then if all those niches are taken, then the fish that are coming in won't be able to colonize there. Then there's predation and disturbance, where predation limits competition. And when they predate on individuals, that opens up niches to new recruits, allowing that specialization to increase further. So which one do we think this is? Well, Turns out it's all of them. Every single one of these hypotheses are operating to varying degrees at all times, and that's why we see so much differentiation, not only within reef communities, but between reef communities. Because maybe lottery's acting harder than recruitment limitation on one, or niche differentiation is stronger than predation on another. And that will help us consider why some reefs are the way they are. So why should we care? Reefs only make up, like I said, less than 2% of the Earth's space, right? Why do they matter then? Well, it turns out about a quarter of marine life live in these reef systems, and over 500 million people depend on them for their livelihood and food. And a lot of those people are actually indigenous coastal communities, which I suggest doing some research on. It's really interesting. But to the modern world, they bring in trillions of dollars to local economies from fishing and diving and tourism. They are a huge buffer from the open ocean to coastal towns, so it allows the water to be calmer, closer to the coast, so you're not destroying beaches and, dying from huge waves. And they also provide really important chemical compounds for pharmaceutical research. And it's really interesting. I suggest doing research on that as well. It's really nice. And one of the biggest reasons is they're all dying. In the last 50 years, about half of the coral reefs have been lost or destroyed worldwide. Here we can see in all of these graphs, almost every single one of them is decreasing. There's some blips that go up, but generally the trend is down. And in the next 15 to 20 years, 15% of the coral reefs are seriously threatened to just completely be gone. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when the coral reefs only make up less than 2% of the ocean surface, 15% is a lot. So we're gonna go over what caused this. What are all these issues? Why are these dying? Well, one of the reasons is global warming or ocean warming. Like I said earlier, 1 to 2 degrees difference in the water temperature can cause that zooxanthella endosymbiont to be expelled from the cnidaria, and if they don't have that zooxanthella, they can't grow and they can't survive. And that causes coral bleaching because the zooxanthella also provide the color that you see in corals, and that's why they turn white. And they don't die immediately after it's expelled, so they'll turn white first, but we have the zooxanthella and then bleaching. They're still alive, dying, then it just dies after about a few months. So it's not very great. And not in contrast, but in synthesis with that is ocean acidification. Because carbon dioxide is the main contributor to global warming, that carbon dioxide gets sequestered into our oceans. About a quarter of the carbon dioxide produced by humans every single year, it goes into our oceans, and that causes our pH to go down, which means higher acidity. There was this study done on these pteropod shells where they put the shells in water with the same pH that our oceans are expected to be in about 80 years, in the year 2100, and the shells dissolved in a little over a month. A month. And this is in 80 years. This is in our lifetimes. Granted, the end of our lifetimes, but hopefully most of us will still be alive by then. Yeah, bad. pH bad. And how this works is CO2 will combine with carbonate in water to make calcium bicarbonate. Calcium bicarbonate, what is it? Something bicarbonate. I don't know. It's the same thing as antacid that you take and you put it in your water. Fun fact. And this causes the skeletons to dissolve into the water, impeding calcification. And by 2050, only 15% of our corals are expected to have enough calcium carbonate to grow. So only 15% of what we have now would be able to survive our CO2 levels in the ocean. Another big reason that they're all dying is unsustainable fishing. Bottom trawling is a really big issue. It's when you drag this huge net behind a boat and it rips everything up and just completely decimates the area. It's even bad in where there aren't even coral reefs. Even if it's just plants and stuff on the bottom, it still disrupts those ecosystems immensely. Then there's cyanide fishing, which is a mixture, they squirt this mixture of cyanide and sodium, I think, into the habitat, and it doesn't kill the fish, but it does incapacitate them so that they can catch them, and this is how they catch fish for aquariums. And then there's ghost nets. These guys are hard to see by fish. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. They get caught up, can't move, they'll die. And there's dynamite fishing, where they throw dynamite into the coral reef and it'll explode, destroying anything around it. Generally not great. And this can cause cascading effects. In our last lecture, we had this pretty similar diagram of top-down control. Apex predators affecting mesopredators negatively, which indirectly affects herbivores positively, which indirectly affects producers negatively, so on, so on. But when we add another level to that, humans, we are the ultimate apex predator. That flips everything completely. We like predating on the apex predators, right? So when we do that, that causes mesopredators to go up, herbivores to go down, producers to go up, which could be good or bad depending on the area. Generally, it's not great because it disrupts the balance of everything. Yeah, and one example of a study that was done on this concept is the overfishing of the spiny and the slipper lobster. These guys like to eat sea urchins, and sea urchins like to eat algae. So when you overfish the lobsters, the urchins will go up and the algae will go down. And because of this, this opens up a lot of free real estate for algal species that are faster growing to dominate the area and decreases that biodiversity of the algae, which decreases the overall biodiversity of the area. Another big issue for these coral reefs is land-based pollution. We covered non-point source pollution, I think, was it last lecture or the lecture before? I don't know. It's not great, comes in from groundwater, and it's not easy to control. But in areas where there's mangroves, like this image here is off of the coast of Maui, and there used to be a mangrove band, like right where all that plume is, and they deforested all of it. They took all of it out. And because of that, all of that stuff that would have before just settled in the mangroves and those nutrients would have been taken up by the mangroves is now being dumped directly onto those coral reefs. And the nutrients in that sediment favors other species, but it also completely suffocates them. Like I said, they need light to survive because of that zooxanthella. If the water's all murky, they can't photosynthesize, they'll bleach and die. And then there's also pollution at sea. Cruise ships are disgusting. I don't know how many of you have been on a cruise ship. I've never been on a cruise ship, but I've seen videos and I think it's my worst nightmare. There's so many people, and because of that, they produce 25,000 gallons of sewage and 150,000 gallons of gray water, which is just, it's wastewater that doesn't have poop or pee in it. Every day. And that water has nasty things. It has makeup, it has pharmaceuticals, cleaning products, some crazy things in there that are not great for any living thing, let alone very, very fragile corals. And they, in the US, the cruise ships only have to be 3 miles off coast to dump this water into the ocean, and 3 miles is still close enough for corals to exist. So this is all being dumped directly on top. Like, it's not just like, oh, in the middle of the ocean. Sometimes they are being dumped directly on top, and it's not great. But some of them are trying to implement greener policies on their cruises. They are starting to put wastewater treatment on them, so that's good, at least. And then there's also the ballast water issue. There's ballast water issues on every ship. If you're familiar with the zebra mussels, they came in ballast water, I think from Europe, and now they're somewhere on the East Coast. And they clog pipes and stuff. It's not great. Everything comes in ballast water. It's horrible. A really bad pollutant for our environment is actually sunscreen. Your sunscreen contains all of those things I'm not even going to try to pronounce. This is almost every single sunscreen brand, and it causes, in coral, bleaching, DNA damage, deformed youth, and even death. And all these other issues. In green algae, it impairs growth and photosynthesis. In mussels, it affects the young. In sea urchins, it damages immune reproductive systems and also deforms the young. And in fish, it decreases fertility, and it even causes sex changes in them sometimes, which is interesting and weird when I found that out. But one thing that you can do instead of using these guys is you can wear a sun shirt or just leggings or even just a regular old t-shirt will work good enough against the sun. Or there's also a brand called Badger brand that was reported in Consumer Reports to be healthy for ecosystems. So if you guys want to look into that, go ahead. And another really big thing that people may not consider is physical destruction. People just going out and touching the reefs because they can, because they're really cool. And when you're down there, you want to touch the reefs. I want to touch the reefs. If you're going to touch the reefs, don't wear gloves. Don't stand on it. Don't use knives to cut it, because if you wear your gloves, it'll snag on them and break it off. But there's also the vessels, mooring versus anchoring. If you're not familiar with mooring, it's when a boat will instead tie itself to a big buoy. If you've seen those things floating out in the middle of the ocean as a buoy, they'll tie themselves to that instead of dropping an anchor, because the anchor will drag along the bottom and destroy a bunch of things. So that's one thing that they've been doing to help prevent issues with that. And then there's also island building. There's the Chinese government in the past has been building a bunch of islands in the South China Sea to expand their military reach. And they do that by completely dredging up the reefs and then just dumping a bunch of sand on top. And obviously that kills the systems pretty immediately. And it's not great for them. And Vietnam is also constructing islands, but they're doing it to expand territory. And it's something that I've never heard of it before I was preparing for this lecture. And I think it's something that I think a lot of people don't want you to know about, because it's an idea that's probably going to spread. So keep that in mind in your future careers in conservation. Speaking of conservation, what are we doing to help the systems? Well, there is the Mission Blue, held by the Sylvia Earle Alliance, is trying to restore the reef systems in the Caribbean, because the Caribbean has lost about 80% of its coral reefs. And what they'll do is they'll just grow little coral pieces in the lab environment and try to transplant it. And it's all good in theory, but it's really expensive. It's about $5.5 million per hectare. And it's being done on a very small scale, so it's not very efficient. Another thing that they're trying to do is, after a huge bleaching event killed half of the coral reef system of the Great Barrier Reef in 2016 or 17, Australia committed $300 million to try to save them through assisted evolution. And what this is they'll take two different species. They take the larvae from the ocean and they genetically engineer them and hybridize them so that they can withstand a higher range of temperatures and pHs. But this also causes a loss of local adaptation. So when they lose their local adaptation, they're not going to be able to survive as well. But there's not really any other option. So this is kind of the best option we have. It's not a great one, but we're doing our best with what we've got. Then there's also the money side of things. The Seychelles was first in the world for a debt nature deal aimed at marine habitat protection. So what they did was they had a bunch of debt and they needed that debt relieved. And they said, well, what if You relieve our debt, and we protect this island. And the Nature Conservancy said, cool, that sounds great, let's do that. And that has completely protected the Seychelles from oil exploration, and it protects fragile habitats from various human activity, all the stuff that we just covered. And then there's also the marine protected areas, very similar to nature conservancies in the U.S. They're just areas, estuaries, where fishing is limited and habitat. You can't go dive there. You can't even bring a boat over it. Just leave it alone is kind of the theory behind that, to help it restore itself. So what can you do? I'm assuming most of us in here are conservation majors or something along the lines. So here's some things that you guys can do. You can be an informed consumer. Make sure you buy things that are healthy for the environment, not full of toxic chemicals, and eat seafood that's sustainably harvested. Typically, things that are farm raised are better. You can support the creation of marine protected areas. You can go work at one of those, maybe volunteer over a summer, and reserves. And same with conservation organizations. Practice sustainable diving. If you go on a diving trip, if you want to touch it, preferably just don't touch it. But if you want to touch it, if you really can't help yourself, take your gloves off. Don't use a knife on any of the corals. Don't stand on it. Make sure you tell other people that when you're going on these trips to not do those things as well. Spread the education. Support good businesses like the Badger brand for sunscreen. It might be a little bit more expensive, and I know we're all broke college students, but when we all have real big adult jobs, invest your money into more green companies like the green cruise ships that are actually using wastewater treatment and such. And you can do what you're doing today. You're taking this class. You can learn about your coral reefs and educate other people and yourselves. Talk to your family about it. Be like, hey, coral reefs are cool, man. Don't be dumb. And that is my TED Talk for the day. Thank you. And I got you out 20 minutes early. Oh, sorry. Any questions? No?
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thank you.
That was great.